course, you guys, I don't know who all knows or doesn't know David Breeden, but we all love him here at the GAA. He has been a huge part of our success in events, coming and talking about exactly what he's talking about, chainsaw safety, but coming and networking, getting to know everybody. He is an arborist. He is also TRAQ qualified and kind of a jack of all trades, working for Husqvarna and owning his tree company, Georgia Tree Masters, and also having the consulting business for safety, like what we're doing tonight, and that is Arbor Pro. I'm really, really looking forward to him giving you his insights and expertise this evening so you guys can learn from a professional. I'm going to go ahead and hand it off to you, David, and give you control.
Awesome. Awesome. Okay. Well, Brittany, thank you so much for the introduction. Welcome, everybody. I'm so excited about doing this. I've been looking forward to this since Brittany asked me to do it months back. So I'll get going. So this one, I like to start these trainings off telling a little story, and I think it's relevant to what we do and running a chainsaw. But this one I want to resonate, or I want the tree care owners to listen to this. If you own a tree care company or you manage a tree care company, if you're in some kind of leadership position, this is for you. It's for everybody, but I want you to really take something from this. So I know this guy worked for the U.S. Forest Service, and he had never been married before, had no children. He lived down in South Georgia with his aunt and uncle, and they contacted him and said, listen, we want to do an exchange program with the Forest Service in South America. Would you be willing to do an exchange? You go down there and live for a couple of years, and they're going to send somebody up here, and you can kind of see how they do things there, and they'll see how we do things up here. He thought about it a little while. He said, I have no attachment here outside of my aunt and uncle. I think it'd be a great experience, something good to put on my resume. So he did it. So they moved him into this little town, and every day he went to work. After he got off, he would walk through the town, and there was a bunch of street vendors that was always set up. They had great food down there, so he would have dinner. And he met this guy that was selling exotic birds, and he was fascinated with them, and he started learning all the different types of birds, and he found out there was like 100 species of parrots. Some of them were small, some of them were large, a lot of them talked. And he developed a friendship with this gentleman, and he just started learning about parrots. And so Christmas was coming up, and it hit him one day. He said, a good thing for me to do would be to buy one of these parrots and ship it back to my aunt and uncle in South Georgia. They've never seen anything like this. They're hard to buy for, and it'd be a very unique gift. So he went and he found the right one, the one that he wanted to get him. He bought it, and his friend that sold it to him helped him take it somewhere, boxed it up in the cage, and shipped it to his aunt and uncle. Christmas Eve, knock on the door. Uncle came out, he looked down, and there was a box sitting on the porch. So he reached up and he grabbed the top and he pulled it off, and he had this parrot looking right back at him, looking right in his eyes. He slammed the box down and he went inside, and his wife said, who was at the door? He says, I don't know. He said, but they left a bird out there. And she said, what kind of bird? He said, I don't know. He said, I lifted the top up and he was looking back at me. I don't know what kind of bird it was. She said, well, what are you going to do with him? He said, I don't know yet. I'm going to sleep on it tonight, and then I'll decide. Got up the next morning. He went outside. He took the top off the cage. He opened the cage up, reached in, and grabbed the parrot by the throat. He walked over to the wood pile. He laid him up there. He grabbed an axe, cut his head off, cleaned all the feathers off, cleaned him out real good, and took him inside and gave him to his wife to cook for Christmas dinner. And oh, did she ever cook him up. She had the mashed potatoes and gravy, the cranberry sauce, had all the things that you have for Christmas, and they sat down and they ate it. So that evening, the nephew, who was dying to know what they thought about the gift he sent, called him up, and his uncle answered the phone. He said, Merry Christmas, Uncle. He said, Merry Christmas, son. He said, look, I'm dying to know, did you get the gift that I sent y'all? He said, well, I don't know about any gift. He's like, what'd you send? He said, it was that bird. Did you not get a bird? Oh, yeah. He said, we got it. Thank you so much. He said, that thing was sure delicious. And his uncle was like, "Uncle, please tell me that you didn't cook and eat that bird." He said, "Oh yeah." He said, "It was the best gift. You know how good your aunt can cook. Mashed potatoes and gravy, cranberry sauce on the side. Best meal we've ever had, son. Thank you so much." He said, "Uncle, please tell me you're kidding." He said, "That bird spoke 3 different languages." And his uncle said, "Well, he should have said something." So hopefully you laughed. I usually do this, and I usually get some laughter. So starting at the beginning of this, I told you tree care owners and managers that this was for you. How does this story relate? Well, you hire a new guy or girl and you get her on the job, and you go out and you're in a production tree environment and you give them one of these, and you go out and they've never had any training and they get hurt or they get cut. Hopefully not, but somebody says, "Well, somebody should have said something, right? I should have had some kind of training." And I'm sure a lot of you have a training program before you hand somebody a chainsaw. But I mean, they come and they say, "Well, I've got experience." Well, you don't know what type of experience they have. And a chainsaw can be a dangerous tool. Last I checked, you don't have to have a driver's license to buy one. So there's no minimum age, there's no minimum training. And as long as you have the money, you can buy one. And then when an accident happens, somebody says, "Well, somebody should have said something." So think about that. So the purpose of what I'm doing tonight, no matter what skill level you're at, whether you're in the tree care industry or whether you're just a casual firewood cutter, you run chainsaws only when you need to, when you have something down, regardless, the thing that I'm trying to leave you with tonight is to increase your awareness for safety and let you know that this can be a dangerous tool. It's also a great tool when used properly and you're protected. So I'm just trying to let you know that things can happen and you need to prepare yourself no matter how you're using it. So there's 2 questions that I generally get an answer to, but I'll leave you with these, and I want you to think about what your answer is for these 2 questions. And the first one is, what is an accident? So usually I get some very good responses on what an accident is. Sometimes I get an accident is something that can be prevented. And I don't believe that that's the correct answer. I don't think that all accidents can be prevented. I use as an example, if I pull up to a 4-way stop sign in my truck and I'm sitting there observing and the law like I'm supposed to, and someone comes up and hits me from behind, there's not a whole lot I can do about that, but that's an accident. I don't think that person intended to do that. So I like to say an accident is an unplanned event. Hopefully nobody on this call has ever planned an accident. As I've gone out for the last nearly 20 years doing training, I did have somebody tell me that they planned an accident, and honestly, when they told me what they did, it was not an accident, it was just stupidity. So an accident is an unplanned event. Let's take it a little higher than that. So a 30,000 foot view of what we're talking about tonight. What is your definition of safety? It was all through this introduction. This is a chainsaw safety presentation. We're talking about safety. If you're in a tree care industry, it gets talked about a lot, or at least I hope it does. One of the things that my wife does almost every day before we leave, she says, "Be safe," especially if I'm going out doing some training. She knows I'm running a saw. She says, "Be safe." She doesn't tell me exactly what she means, but I know. So my definition of safety is awareness that an accident can happen. So safety is awareness that an unplanned event, I don't go out and expect for an accident to happen, but I know that the possibility exists. So if you're running a chainsaw, there's a lot of things that can happen. So safety is awareness, and it's a planning process. When you run a chainsaw, no matter whether it's every day or casually, you better learn how to plan, because every time you make a cut, something changes, right? You reduce weight, the log rolls, moves in some direction. And hopefully before you ever put that chainsaw into the wood, you're actually making a plan, and a plan happens every time you pull the trigger. So I'm going to go through some ways to protect yourself, and I do these in order of importance to me. Nobody has to tell me to keep myself safe. I'm a priority to myself. If you're not a priority, then there's something wrong there. Your boss should not have to tell you to wear personal protective equipment. I don't wait until I've started my chainsaw before I say, oh no, do I have my chaps on? Do I have my hearing protection on? No, I'm planning that prior to ever getting my chainsaw out. At this point, I don't even know if it'll run, but I'm making sure that I've got myself protected. So that's a priority to me, and it should be a priority to you. So not the most frequent, but the most costly accidents in the tree care industries are struck by us to them. And that's obvious. If you get hit and you got a serious head injury and you're in the hospital in intensive care for 30 days, I mean, the hospital bills are going to be incredible. If you're in the tree care industry, head protection is an absolute, no question about it. There's too many things, too many moving parts on a job site. But if you're a casual user and you're running a chainsaw underneath the canopies of trees, you should think about investing in some head protection. If you've got anything up there to protect, it's worth it protecting, and that's how somebody taught me that. So this is actually a helmet system, okay? Helmets are round like your head, and they're designed to make things glance off if they hit you in the head. They're made out of plastic or hydrated polymer. It's just a fancy word for plastic that has some hydration in it. And as a result of how they're constructed, there's a time limit that they can be in service. The ultraviolet rays of the sun remove that moisture. So if you invest in a helmet, it doesn't mean that it's going to last forever. They're all date stamped. So anything that's polymer has a date on it when it was manufactured. It could have sat in a store for a long period of time. But by pushing in on the sides, you can see if this helmet still has its hydration. If you see little white spider lines or cracks coming here, this helmet needs to be taken out of service and you need to get another one. So the fact that I called this a system means that there's multiple safety features built into this. So there's hearing protection here. Hearing protection is very important. Once again, I'll go back to tree care. There's a lot of noise. Noise causes fatigue, which we'll talk about later. But if you're running a chipper, you got a climber in a tree or in a lift or in a bucket truck, chainsaw operators on the ground, you got a lot of things going on. You've got a lot of noise. Chainsaws run about 110 decibels, which has been proven to cause long-term hearing loss. Thing above 85 decibels, you should be wearing hearing protection. Doesn't matter if it's a lawnmower or a chainsaw. Chainsaws just go way past that threshold. So you need to find some type of hearing protection that'll give you at least 25 decibel noise reduction rating to get below that 85 decibels so you're not damaging your hearing. I prefer a muff style hearing protection because it covers my ears and I find it to be comfortable. If you like that or you like earplugs, minimally you should wear something. Eye protection. I just so happen to have eye protection that's integrated into this helmet, which is one of the reasons why I like this particular model. You don't have to worry about breaking them or forgetting them or whatever the case may be. Protect your eyes. Although I might not get you to protect your ears, I think you understand. I mean, if you have an eye injury, that pain is excruciating. You don't want to get injured. So, eye protection is critical. This is face protection. This shield is not eye protection. It is designed to work in conjunction with my eye protection, and it protects my face. So I know what you're probably thinking, that guy don't need to worry about protecting his ugly face, but I try to do that. If you're working around a chipper, nobody has to tell you to put this down. If you've ever been slapped in the face, if you've ever fed a chipper, you've been slapped in the face, and it only takes once. So you actually put this down. So this is a nice system. Never at once will I tell you any PPE will keep you from getting injured. It is designed to lessen the severity of an injury and to also increase your reaction time. So always wear head protection if you're out in the woods, no matter what you're doing, because limbs are constantly pruning themselves by dropping limbs. So protect your head. Moving down, I like to speak to visibility a little bit. I don't really care how you get this. You can buy a fancy jacket or you can buy one of these cheap vests. But if you're running a chainsaw on a crew, it's great, especially by a highway. You want motorists to actually be able to see you. You want your coworkers to be able to see you so you know they know where you are. If you're out and you're running a saw at your house on the weekend, you also want somebody to be able to locate you if you have some type of medical emergency. So visibility is something I think that's very important when you're out running a chainsaw. So if I got some people here that like to play the odds, if you like to gamble, by far the most common and most often the most frequent injuries in chainsaw operations are lacerations to the left leg. So I normally ask, which leg, but I'm not going to get any feedback. But the left leg, because chainsaws are right-handed. If you're left-handed and you do everything left-handed, you have to learn how to run a chainsaw right-handed. So as a result of their design, if you're running with the proper stance, you're going to have your left foot forward, okay, like a fighter stance and an athletic stance, and that left leg is just out there. So lacerations to the left leg are the most common of chainsaw injuries. There's about 35 to 40,000 reported chainsaw injuries each year. There's many more that go unreported, but about 35 to 40,000 that are reported in emergency rooms. If you've ever been cut with a chainsaw or you have witnessed that, chainsaws don't cut like or saw chain is not cut like a knife. It removes material just like it does wood. So it makes for a nasty injury.
David?
Yes.
I've got a that are happening, so I just wanted to bring that up. First of all, I've got some requests for links to the equipment, so if you could send that to me, then I could probably send it out after the fact to everybody. But Alex Levy wants to know, do you have any thoughts on single piece versus breakaway type safety vests?
That's a great question. I think you can't go overboard when it's your personal protection. I mean, you can get a vest that gets caught, in a chain if you're in a bad position. I'd say any gear that you wear while running a chainsaw needs to be tight to your body, and a vest is no different. So I think if you utilize proper position, which we'll talk about a little bit later, you can avoid a lot of problems. I think most of the problems go away, but a great question. As far as links to equipment, what you're seeing tonight, this is my preference. I don't promote any specific brand. She was clear. I work for a manufacturer, but I can do this presentation with any type of chainsaw. They all have the same safety features, and whatever you use, I want you to be safe, but I can certainly show you what I use and why I prefer it. So leg protection, as I said, is the lacerations to the left leg are the most common injuries in chainsaw use. So this is what's known as a pair of apron style chaps. And you can see that these have actually been used. I've used these in 2 demos where I take them to a log and I showed people how they work. The reason they're called apron is that they only cover the front of your leg. So they're like your grandmother's apron. They don't cover the back. And that's perfectly fine because the action is happening in the front. And the thing to know about a pair of chaps, I wish you could see the lower half of my body. The apron style chaps usually have 2 buckles and they need to be tightened up as tight as you can get them. One of the disadvantages of an apron style chap, if you don't tighten those buckles up as tight as you can get them, as soon as the chainsaw comes in contact with this outer cover, the cutter grabs this and will twist it on your leg, and you'll possibly get the saw into your leg. So these are very effective. These have 6 layers of material. You see a white type material that's known as warp knit. And then the yellow material in there is Kevlar. So the Kevlar is not as plentiful as the warp knit. The warp knit is what actually does the work. And the Kevlar runs vertically through the fibers and just provides some structural integrity. But when the chainsaw comes in contact with this cordura, which is the outer material, it cuts through it like it's nothing, just like if it were a pair of Carhartts or a pair of Levi's. And the cutters grab these fibers and they jam it up as the chain runs around the sprocket. and it happens almost immediately. If you look at the back of these, this back layer is cut. I think more or less the log did this, but the fibers really aren't even pulled here. And on this side, it's even less damage. So these are very effective. Doesn't matter, as long as they have this UL label on them, that means that they have passed the American standard and that they have been tested. So please don't buy anything that doesn't have this label or a CE label, which means that they're rated for Canada and Europe, and the standard is much higher there. Do we have another question?
We sure do. David wants to know, he says he's previously been told that any damage to chaps is cause for throwing them out. Even if the stuffing hasn't herniated, is that still true?
Yeah, so if you cut a pair of chaps in any capacity, they need to be discarded, David. Thank you so much for asking the question. Even if the outer cover has been ripped, you really need to consider that. Those are probably okay. I'm not telling you to use them. When those fibers have been pulled at all, you need to discard them because they're not going to work as effectively. So the covers are pretty, those are pretty durable. If you have a close call or something like that, which might be what you're describing, I would get a new pair. I'd be safe. I mean, we're talking about, $100 to $150. We're not talking about a lot of money. Average chainsaw injury costs about $6,000 or $7,000. So I think, if you do the math, you just throw those out and get another pair. Great question. This is a wrap style chap. So the only difference here, there's a couple of feature difference, but there's a lot more buckles on this. And these actually wrap around the calf of your leg. And once again, there's not much action back there, which is what I said earlier. But the fact that it goes around my calf, and when I tighten it, it minimizes that twisting that happens as soon as the cutter gets into the outer layer of the chap. So a wrap chap is better in that they're a little more comfortable and they're a little more effective to minimize the twisting. You can see here, this is where the protection stops, where you see this seam where it transitions from gray to orange. This is where the protection, so there is no protection up here. So once again, I go back to utilizing good position and understanding reactive forces and things like that. That's plenty of protection. These are not cut proof. I'll say again, they're designed to lessen the severity of an injury and to increase your reaction time. Don't forget gloves. I mean, there's not a requirement per se for you to wear gloves running a chainsaw, but if you're pulling brush, you should consider wearing gloves just to protect your hand. And gloves are good when you're touching the chain, especially when the bar and chain's hot. So wear hand protection. And then finally, foot protection. You know what good footwear is for this. I'm not going to tell you to go out and buy a pair of chainsaw protective boots. I've had several pair. They're not very comfortable. They're super expensive. If you want to invest in a pair, I think that's great. I just don't think that that's necessary, but something that's supportive. I would not condone a pair of athletic shoes like tennis shoes. And I don't know if we got any people from Alabama on here, but they like to run chainsaws with flip-flops or barefooted. And we certainly don't want to do that. And I'm not picking on anybody. I'm just making a little joke. So let's move on to, I've got myself protected from head to toe. I'm ready to go. Now I need to move to my chainsaw. So all chainsaws, regardless of brand, come with 3 safety features, and you need to check these. So even if you're in a tree care business or you're a municipality, which I deal with a lot, they have what I like to call community chainsaws. So the chainsaw that I run today, somebody else ran yesterday or last week or whatever the case. So I really don't know what type of life it's had, what happened the last time somebody used it. So I need to take just a few seconds to check the safety features and make sure they're working, make sure they're intact. The first one is a chain brake. After 1994, ANSI mandated that all chainsaws, regardless of brand, have a chain brake. Chain brakes work in 2 ways. They work manually and they work on inertia. So when I disengage the chain brake, as I just did, the chain turns easily around the bar. When I put the chain brake on, the brake band clamps around on the clutch drum and will not allow it to turn around. So this is where the chain brake needs to be engaged anytime that I start my chainsaw or crank my chainsaw, or anytime that I'm using it and I take more than one step, I need to engage my chain brake. But I mentioned that it works another way in inertia, with inertia, and I'll talk about this later. So keep in mind that if I get a rotational force of the chainsaw, because I get it into the wrong area on the bar, that rotational force is always in plane with the bar. Okay, so if I'm running a saw like this, it's going to come straight back. If I'm running a saw like this, a kickback is going to be this way. So by proper positioning, I try to minimize my risk there. But a chainsaw has inertia chain brake, and it's designed and weighted in a way that when the chainsaw rotates back in the plane of the bar, the chain brake wants to go in the opposite direction. So I can't crank my saw up and demonstrate that, but I can do it by dropping it on this piece of wood. So my chain brake is engaged, chain will not turn. I disengage it, my chain turns around the bar. So I drop it on a log or a piece of wood and see that the chain brake engaged. So as the bar came to an abrupt stop, the chain brake kept moving in the same direction. So let's try it again. Chain brake is engaged, it's disengaged, chain turns around the bar easily. Drop it. When it hits that log, the chain brake automatically engages, which is the way that it would happen if I get that rotational force. Most people think when you get that rotational force that your hand engages the chain brake, but most of the time that inertia chain brake kicks in long before your hand ever touches the chain brake. So both of those features work. Throttle interlock system. So this throttle interlock trigger, I still go and I see people that take pieces of tape and tape this down, which I don't understand why people are doing that. This is here and this is utilized in a lot of pieces of power equipment, but it ensures that my hand is in the driver's seat before I can throttle this chainsaw up. If it's not, then the saw will not throttle up. Believe it or not, I still see chainsaws in shops that had the chain brakes disengaged. So if I have no chain brake, my saw is running, I've got my throttle interlock overridden with a piece of tape, and I'm working on a storm damaged tree and I'm out in the crown and I put the running saw down and a limb comes through the handle, then it could easily throttle my saw up and get into my leg. So I like to call that tolerance stacking. I mean, if I remove one thing and another, I'm just exposing myself to way too much risk. Do not ever add any safety feature on a chainsaw or any other piece of equipment for that matter. So the final safety feature in a chainsaw is called a chain catch. So this is made out of aluminum. They're always made out of something that is less durable than the chain itself. And if you look on your chainsaw, first of all, you need to make sure it's there and make sure it's covering this opening between the side cover and the crankcase, because it's very hard for you to see at home, but this is a 24-inch bar. So if I'm running this chainsaw and the chain were to come off, which, as you know, if you run a saw, it happens sometimes, this is going to wrap the chain up and keep it from reaching my leg, because it could easily do that because it's long enough. And it will slap the chain on this offset part. That's why the handle is made offset to actually cover my hand. So if you look at your saws that you're using, you'll see that hopefully they're there, but if you look at it, it's actually worked a few times, some of them, and that's how they get knocked off, is the chain will actually hit it and break it. So make sure that is there. They could be made out of a composite, which is the same as maybe your crankcase. They get broken off. They could be a hard plastic or rubber material. There's a lot of things that they're made out of. Just make sure that's there and you'll be good. So if you've got all three of those safety features on your saw, you're good to go. Let's move into some quick maintenance tips. We're not obviously here tonight to learn how to work on chainsaws, but I think it's very important to understand how to maintain your saw, because if your saw is not running properly, it's not safe. I see a lot of people who have a chainsaw and they're walking around while they're using it and they're throttling it up, which means they've got the chain brake disengaged and they're walking from cut to cut, throttling the saw up. That doesn't show me that you're cool or anything like that. What it tells me is that your saw is not running properly. It tells me that your saw won't idle. And because it won't idle, you're having to throttle it up in between cuts. If your saw's running properly, it should idle. The chain shouldn't turn it idle. It should run in all positions and it should accelerate without hesitation. If it does those 4 things, then like I like to say, that dog will hunt. So I'm going to take the side cover off real quickly here. And yes, this saw's dirty. That might be the one advantage of this training virtually. You really can't see how dirty it is. So we're going to talk about that a little bit. Before I do that, I'm going to talk about one of the most important things about your saw, and that's your air filter. Okay, this saw is 60 cc's, and this is the air filter. This is what I like to refer to as the nose of the chainsaw. So when you take a deep breath, you have a lung capacity. Each lung can hold about 40 cc's of air. Well, this chainsaw at wide open throttle runs nearly 14,000 RPMs and it's 60 cc's. If you're good in math, you can multiply 14,000 times 60, and that's how many cc's of air passes through this air filter every 60 seconds. So one of the 4 things that a chainsaw needs to operate is air. It needs fuel and it needs compression and it needs spark. But if it does not have air, if you've got a dirty air filter, it's like asking you to run a marathon with a stopped up nose. You're not going to do very well. So keep the nose of the chainsaw clean. If you read your owner's manual, it'll tell you you need to clean this out every day. And that's probably not reality, but make sure these are clean. That will promote long life and it'll make your chainsaw run a lot better. You can keep everything under here clean with compressed air. I don't condone cleaning your air filter with compressed air, but if you do, blow from the inside out and not the outside in. If you do that, you're just simply blowing dirt right inside of the air filter. As soon as you crank your saw up, you've got dirt and dust inside the intake. It's just going to suck it right into the cylinder, and you're going to have some long-term issues from that. So I took my bar and chain off. Every time you take your chain off, you should rotate your bar. They have fancy writing and painting and stuff on them, but they can be ran in both positions, and you should do that. The temperatures inside of a bar can get over 500 degrees when a chainsaw is in operation. And so it's an incredible amount of heat that's generated, which is, like I said, going back to you should always wear gloves when the chainsaw and the chain is hot. So when you're putting your chain back on, obviously you want to make sure the cutters are pointed away from the power head. This being the power head, cutters facing away. That's if you want to take trees that are standing and take them down. If you want to take a tree that's down and stand it back up, you just put the chain on the opposite way, right? There must be an application for that, because occasionally I see chainsaws with the chains on backwards, and I figure that's if you want to take a tree that's down and stand it back up. But I like to use my saw for taking trees that are standing and take them down. So I make sure that the cutters are facing forward. I do get some people that ask me about chain tension, and I used to tell people, hey, you know, if you take your chain, you take your saw and you get it what you think's good tension on it, and it pulls up out of the bar rail, and you get about 4 drive links showing. Pardon me, I can't see that well. And you get 4 drive links showing, then you've got good chain tension. Well, I used to tell everybody that until I went out to the West Coast, and nobody runs 24-inch bars out there. I mean, they run 40-plus-inch bars on everything. And when they pull the chain out of the bar rail, they cleared, 10 to 12 drive lengths. So basically I had to go back to the drawing board on that. So what I like to tell people now, good chain tension on a saw that's cold is a chain that will snap back into the bar rail like a guitar string and then move freely down the bar. Okay, that's good chain tension. Okay, so I tighten the back bar nut up and I test it and I think that's pretty good. So that doesn't matter if you've got a 24-inch bar or a 48-inch bar, that normally works. So I'm good to go there. So one of the most common things I get when I'm out training is people want to know how to sharpen chain. And I always say I'm just here for a day. There's no way I'm going to be able to teach you how to do this in a day. Tiger Woods didn't become the best golfer on planet Earth by just falling out of the bed and start playing golf. He practiced many thousands of reps. But I tell people, listen, I can teach you the fundamentals of sharpening chain, because if you never understand what the fundamentals are, you'll never be able to do it. My childhood love was playing baseball, and spring training's going on right now. And if we went to a spring training facility in the morning, I promise you'd see the best hitters in Major League Baseball hitting off of a tee. Okay, this is hitting off the tee. If we went to the World Series, so October, they've played 162 plus games. They should be in the groove by then. I promise you can go to game 7 of the World Series. Before the game, somebody's down there hitting off a tee. Why do they do that? Because they understand the fundamentals can never be moved away from. You always have to understand the fundamentals and go back to the fundamentals. So this is a chain cutter. This happens to be a left-hand cutter by the way that it's angled, so it'd be positioned on the left side of the bar, and then it would be opposed by a right-hand cutter. Now we're talking about standard sequence chain. If you get into skip or semi-skip, then obviously there's some skip. But this is a left-handed cutter, and there's 5 parts of this, and I'm going to tell you what they are. And when you understand the parts and the angles and what they do, then you can go out and decide to invest in the billion-dollar industry that is chain sharpening devices, and you can decide what you want to use. It's like weight loss. Everybody wants to take a pill and they want to lose 30 pounds by this weekend, and they sell this stuff, and they all just sharpen chain, no matter if it's a standard file or some type of fancy filing guide. So in this cutter, this is known as the top plate. This angle is 25 to 30 degrees, depending on the type of chain that you're using. This angle allows this cutter, when it comes in contact with the wood, as soon as this angle hit, this cutter slightly tilts to the left. The one over here to the right slightly tilts to the right, and that creates the kerf, which is the cut that you actually see in the wood. So if this didn't tilt out and create a curve, then the chainsaw would get caught in its own cut. So the cut has to be slightly wider than the bar, which is why this angle is here. And it's 25 to 30 degrees because it's been determined that this is the optimum angle for this top plate to work. Also, you can see this little mark here. This mark is known as the witness mark, or the 4mm mark. When you see this on your saw chain, it lets you know you cannot sharpen past this because the structural integrity of the cutter will be compromised. So if you've used this and you sharpen it all the way back to here, great job. Get another chain. You've gotten a lot of use out of this one. This is known as the side plate. The side plate, you usually take a straight line and come down from the point to where the gullet starts, which is right here, and it forms essentially a 90-degree angle. The side plate does the hardest part of the cutter. It actually severs the long fibers of the wood. So when you measure stress on a chain cutter, the side plate has the most stress of any of the parts. This little piece underneath here, that reminds you of your daddy's woodworking chisel. That's what it's called, as a chisel angle. Chisel angles are 45 degrees, and it's what removes that chip. And the radius, the round radius of the file makes that 45. That's not anything that you got to try to get to that. when the file is going across the cutter, it's making this 45-degree angle here. So I've got a top plate 25 to 30, side at 90, and I've got my chisel angle at 45. So this is known as a semi-chisel cutter. So semi-chisels are great for cutting in dirty conditions. They retain their sharpness better than full chisel. You see this on a lot of saws that are maybe 50 cc's of displacement or less. Great chain and very easy to sharpen, but they don't have as distinct a point as a full chisel chain, but this is known as the point. And if a cutter doesn't have a point, it can't bite into the wood. So this bites, and every time you sharpen, you have to make sure you reestablish that point, or the cutters are just bouncing around and it can't take a bite. So the final part is known as the depth gauge, or this is known as the raker. It's called a lot of things. If you go down to South Georgia, they call it dogs and all kinds of stuff, right? Not Georgia Bulldogs, but there's a lot of slang used for this. The most important thing to know is this determines how thick that chip is that you're actually taking. This comes out of the box set at 25 thousandths of an inch below the point. And it looks like there's a lot of distance here because this is very large. If you look on your chainsaw, the distance between the point of the cutter and the depth gauge is very hard to tell by the eye, but 25 thousandths is not very much. So the problem that people have is they grab a file or flat file and say, well, my daddy used to do it like this, and he did it like that because his daddy did it like that. And I just take 3 strokes out of that right off the box, out of the box. And a gentleman that taught me a lot of things told me something, and it was very profound. He said that a chain manufacturer will spend millions of dollars developing a product, and when it comes to market, they have tested it so many times, and out of the box, it will cut wood, and it'll cut wood good. He said a guy will take a $1 file and re-engineer it in about 30 seconds. He says, instead of trying to re-engineer it because your daddy did it this way and his daddy did it that way, why don't you learn how to sharpen it and try to get it like it was when it came out of the box? And if you can do that, then you're great at sharpening chain, and you're not only efficient with it cutting sharp, but you're also safe. If you start taking this down, you make for a very aggressive chainsaw, and you're opening yourself up to problems. Just because your daddy did it that way doesn't mean that it's the right way. Just because his daddy did it that way doesn't make it the right way. So these are the fundamentals. You have to understand what these are and get these angles, and then you can actually know that you can sharpen chain. Whatever device you use really doesn't matter to me. So moving on, let's talk.
David?
Yes.
I actually have a quick question.
Okay.
Mr. Long wants to know if you have a hack for quickly unbending a chain with 2+ loops in it.
Yeah. We don't have that chain over there anymore. Quick, I'll take this one off. Let me do that with another one. So, Mr. Long is talking about when you get a chain out of the box, it's all, tangled up, for lack of a better term. You never can pull them out and just put them on your saw. They're all kinked up. So the trick that I like to use is to just grab a little. The guy that taught me this might be on this call tonight because I saw his name on it. Hopefully he's here. Gary House, if you're here, thank you, buddy. So manufacturers take the chain and just put it in the box like that, and you get it out. And so that's got 2 loops in it. I might not be able to duplicate it, but just grab the loops. And if you grab the loops, sometimes you have to keep grabbing them. But if you just grab loops, maybe that's what he's talking about. So you just keep grabbing them. And once you get 2, then you can grab them like this. So the chain gets turned inside out. So I can't demonstrate what you have, but it always works. Just grab a loop and it'll fall out. And if you can get it down to 2, you just grab those loops and fix it out. So try that a little bit, and I think that'll work great for you. So I'm moving on, and now I'm getting to the point where I want to utilize my saw. Got myself protected. I checked the safety features on my chainsaw. I'm good to go. See how good of a mood my wife is in tonight. I could actually crank a chainsaw here in the barn, right? No, I'm not going to do that because I don't have leg protection on. I don't have ear and eye protection. But I'm going to talk about the 2 ways that I condone for you to crank your chainsaw. And if you have people that you lead, you should be teaching them to crank a chainsaw like this. I will note that when you're in a tree, the way you crank chainsaw might vary a little bit. If you're working out of a bucket, the standard is if you have something between yourself and the chainsaw chain or the bar, then you can crank it with some other method. But if you're on the ground and you're a ground worker, this is not one of the preferred starting methods. This is no good. Look at how the rope is coming out of the cover. I see people every day and they say, I can't keep a rope in that thing. It's a piece of junk. And I'm like, well, show me how you crank it. And he reaches up and grabs it like this because this is how his daddy taught him how to do it. And I'm like, look at how the rope's coming out of the side cover right there. This chainsaw, the last time I checked, has been cranked over 6,000 times. It's a 2011 model. That doesn't mean how many pulls, that means how many times it's actually cranked. So let's just multiply that times 3, and it's probably had 18 to 20,000 pulls. I just replaced the rope in it about 2 months ago, and it didn't need it because I don't crank it like this. First of all, from a safety standpoint, I'm not safe. I don't like this. I've got no control. Look at this. This is very common, especially in the tree care industry. The 2 ways would be on the ground, trying to get where you can see me here. So I like a clamp start. I'm going to tilt my screen down so you can see this. A clamp start, I grab it where the handle turns, okay? And the saw naturally rotates in my hand. And then I squeeze it just above my knees and I wrap my left hand around the handle. I'm not like this. I've got it wrapped. And I am pulling through. And if you can see, this is where the rope comes straight out of the side cover. This is the way the manufacturer designed it to be cranked. Not like this, okay? That's no good. This is no good. But this clamp star, I got complete control. I've got control in 2 positions, my left hand and between my knee, and it doesn't get any easier than this. This is the way you should be training yourself or the people that work for you that run a chainsaw to crank your saw. If you crank it on the ground, that's a great way. You're not going to be able to see me, but the same principles apply. Hand wrapped around the front handle, put your foot through the rear handle or over the top. You've got control there. Kneel down on one knee. And then when you pull, the rope comes right out of the side cover like it's designed. So proper starting will literally minimize your maintenance and your breakdowns on recoils and starter ropes. And you guys know who I'm talking about. If you have a crew that goes through starter ropes all the time, you need to look at how they're cranking the chainsaws. It's probably got nothing to do with the quality of the recoil that the manufacturer puts on there. So one of the things, the most important thing that I can cover tonight in the short amount of time that we have is what the reactive forces of the chainsaw are. If you went tomorrow and bought a chainsaw and you had absolutely no experience, the person selling you that should give you a 10-minute presentation on what the reactive forces are. I've got a good friend of mine. He's expert witness a lot of times in chainsaw injuries and fatalities. He told me one time, he said, when I talk to people or I read a report, the person says, oh, I got a kickback. The saw kicked back and I got hurt. And when he looks at the evidence, he finds that it's usually not a kickback. It's usually the chainsaw operator's reaction to the saw's action. Okay, so the chainsaw actually did something and I reacted. It may have been a kickback, but in most cases, he finds out that it's not. Every chainsaw has reactive forces, and if you're learning how to run a chainsaw, or you're talking to people who do, they need to understand what they are. Not only is it a safety issue, but it also lines up into ergonomic design of the chainsaw and making the chainsaw easier for you to run. So if I take this saw, and I'll quickly go through these, like I said, I usually get some interaction. But if I'm cutting this piece of wood right here, and I'm using the bottom part of this chain, think about what the chainsaw power head wants to do in relationship to my body. So if I come up here and I make this cut, the chainsaw wants to pull away from me based on the chain turning around the bar. So this is known as pull in on the bottom side. So if I come underneath here and I cut from this part of the chain out to here, think about what the chainsaw wants to do in relationship to my body. When I come in contact with the wood, the saw wants to push back to me, which is actually where I want it. If you look at your chainsaw, it's made with a lot of rounded edges, and it's designed to run close to your body. And if the saw pushes back to me, that's actually where I want it. So think about this area of the bar, this top quadrant of the bar, and think about what the possibility, what the chainsaw does when you touch it to a piece of wood. Based on the species of the wood, based on whether you're going with the grain, against the grain, there's a lot of different variables. You will get a very violent reaction known as a kickback. So if I were to touch this at wide open throttle, this chainsaw could kick back, and it's always in plane with the bar. Go back to the beginning when I said a reactive force, a rotational force that is always in plane with the bar. So if I got very poor position, which is this, which anybody that's ever worked storms sees beginners running a chainsaw like this. If I get a kickback right here, that's a Roger Clemens fastball right down the middle, because I've got terrible position. I've got my feet squared. The chainsaw bar is on the right side of my body. And if I get that rotational force, which I want to stay away from that area of my bar, but if I get that, I'm in a good position, and hopefully my inertia chain brake actually works. Now, the bottom quadrant of this bar is very useful if I'm using techniques like bore cutting or just cutting in general, and we won't get into any technical stuff. We'll save that for a later date. So this part of the bar, I get very little reaction. This upper quadrant, I get a severe reaction. I want to show you on this bar so you remember. So if I touch the top part of the bar to a log, it makes the saw push back to me. That's why it's known as the pushing side. If I stick this to the wood, the bottom side, the chainsaw wants to pull away from my body, and I want to minimize that through the day as much as possible. I was told one time, for every time you take a 20-pound mass and you let it separate 2 inches from your body, you add about 30-40 PSI to your lower back. So if you think about holding it out here in my classes, I usually say, can you hold this chainsaw like this for 5 minutes? And nobody on planet Earth can do that besides me. I'm the only one that can do that. No, I can't do it either, but I want to keep the chainsaw close to my body because that's going to reduce fatigue, and that actually minimizes or is how this chainsaw was designed. This is the kickback zone, that upper quadrant of the bar. If you get that into a piece of wood, depending on the species, with the grain, against the grain, you get a severe rotational force. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. Now, this SC down here identifies the starting corner. If I put that in the wood and I'm bore cutting and doing things like that, that's a very useful part of the bar. So ingrain that into your memory. If you don't know anything else, this is the most important thing that I've talked about all night long. Let's talk about, and I'm going to wrap up because I think I'm about out of time, but let's talk about why kickback happens. So here's a piece of wood I'm cutting, and I'm going down through here and I'm cutting 25 thousandths of an inch, 25 thousandths of an inch. I'm using the the pulling side, I'm cutting 25 thousandths of an inch. I mean, the chain's working like it's supposed to. But when I get to the kickback zone, I'm no longer, my chain goes over that corner. I'm no longer cutting 25 thousandths of an inch anymore. And if you see this in slow-mo, the chain goes from running about 70 to 80 miles an hour to when it hits right there, it stops. It literally, the chain comes to a stop. And for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction, and you get that rotational force known as kickback. Stay away from the kickback zone on your chainsaw, and you will avoid a lot of problems. I wish I had about 3 or 4 more hours and we could talk about a lot more stuff, but I think I may be out of time, and I like to maintain time integrity.
I think you have done fantastic at putting a lot of information. I know you've been running around, so we appreciate it.
It's all good.
I do have a few minutes. Does anybody have any questions? If so, please drop it here for me. You guys will notice that I put the CEU sign-in sheet in the chat, so make sure you're filling that out to get your CEU.
Saw my good friend Rusty Lee. Thanks
Rusty.
for being here, Rusty. He sent me a picture of his granddaughter today holding a certain brand of chainsaw.
A certain brand of husky. Well,
yeah.
I got a cute picture of my kid holding.
Raising them right. You're raising them right.
What's your favorite steel chainsaw?
That's a great question. Probably right now would be a 500i. I really like to run it. I can't wait to run the 400. I have not ran it yet, and 462s. So I like them. They're good.
Well, and remember, everybody, that I had provided the wrong info, the wrong number for David. Like I said, he's a jack of all trades. So it was one of his other trade phone numbers. I dropped that in the chat. We'll put that again in the chat for you right now. David, you've got a quick question from Walbert. How do you tell when your bar needs to be replaced?
So a question, when you run a lot of dull chain on your saw, you'll notice your bar turning blue. Means it's gotten excessively hot. That causes excessive wear. If you think about the bar, chain, and sprocket, and I wasn't able to get into that, but those are a system. So those work in tandem. If any one of them is worn or something's wrong, it causes wear on the other components. But bars naturally get flaring, whereas you run your hand along the edge of the bar, it can get sharp. You can get what's known as bar dishing underneath the bottom side of the bar right here. If you got chain that's loose and you run it loose a lot, it will literally miss this area of the bar and it'll slap the bar here. And so that's why you rotate your bar. There are things called bar dressers where you can run down the rails of the bar and take that burring off. It's kind of a tool that was adopted by the skiing industry. They use it on snow skis to take the edges down, so you can get those. But replace a bar if it has a sprocket nose and the sprocket is sharp. If it's very sharp to the touch, you either need to replace the sprocket nose if it's replaceable, or get a new bar. If it is very blue, like if you take a torch to a piece of metal and it turns really blue, like I see them a lot. Like I don't ever see it on a tree care guy saw. He understands sharp chain. He understands when it's not. But a lot of homeowner saws, I see excessive bar wear from chains that are dull. The one last thing, and I'll stop talking about this. A lot of manufacturers that test bars, they usually, I brought this up, and I think it's a miss. They test bars with sharp chain on them, and they test durability. I'm like, well, have you ever thought about testing one with the dull chain on it? Because sometimes, especially homeowner, the bar is not as quality and they spend a lot of their lives with dull chain. If a sharp chain will get the bar up to 500 degrees, they say that dull chain gets it up, 700-800 degrees, and heat causes more wear than anything else. So I think the best way to tell you is by look. If it's bent, obviously got to be replaced. And if it's gotten really hot, it's going to need to be replaced.
Well, thank you for that. Thank you for everybody and all of your feedback coming through the evaluation form and your CEU sign-in sheets. I've dropped that again in the chat for you guys. I've got another question for you, David, from Kevin. Do you know if the insulated gas-powered pole saw that Husqvarna markets is rated for high voltage or low voltage?
It is and I'm assuming you're talking about the MAD saw. It is, I don't know. It's rated for high voltage. It is, to my knowledge, the only gas-powered minimum approach distance or dielectric pole saw on the market, and there's a battery version that's coming inside of 2023, so that it's highly sought after. A lot of line clearance companies are using it. Gunnison is a sponsor on here. Gunnison has bought a lot of those, and there's other companies that are, Townsend uses them a lot, Asplin's using them a lot. We've done very well with that product, but yeah, I mean, it is the alternative to hydraulic powered dielectric pole pruners.
Awesome. Kevin, I hope that answered your question. David, do you have time for another question?
Yes, ma'am. I'll stay here all night.
All right. Well, don't tell us that. We might keep you here.
Well, I live here, so I'm not going anywhere.
Kevin, another Kevin wants to know, what is the best resource to qualify, like formally qualify your crew members in your experience? So is there a virtual class or a checklist or something that could supplement a training, an expert like yourself? Like, how would they go about that?
Great question. I think there's a gap, really, unless you have somebody on staff that can do it. There's some good resources out there. So one of them is ugasaw.org. Ellen, I don't want to mess up her last name, but is it Bowski? She's a great friend of GAA. She's a very smart lady, and she promotes that site. There's a lot of good content on there. Go to that. There's some training modules there. Honestly, in terms of training that you can get that I think is high quality on the East Coast, you've got, a gentleman by the name of Tim Ard, who I learned everything that I know from. He's trained over 100,000 people all over the country. He's out in California right now. He makes his living doing this. He's North American Training Systems. They're very good. They've kind of turned their focus towards the utility side of the business, because that's such a big part of the industry now. That's where the volume's coming from. I'll give another plug to Gunnison, and they do a lot of that. So, but yeah, I mean, learn and feel like, get somebody internally that you feel is competent enough to do this and teaching the right things. And so from a cost standpoint, if you can't afford to have in-house trainer, then send a designated person, a chainsaw ambassador, if you will, to one of these classes and let them be able, there's a lot of train the trainer things where they can come back and train your crew. Sometimes it's difficult to get somebody that's already inside of the organization to do it because they're friends and they're, people pick on them or whatever the case may be. But safety is a very serious thing, and it should be a part. If you're in the tree care industry, it should be a part of your daily routine. And if you don't know, you need to learn. I was in Canton today, and I rode by 2 tree companies. One of them I won't mention. They had all their PPE on and they were doing it right. And the one literally a mile away, nobody had a helmet on, nobody had any chaps on, and there was 1,000 things I saw wrong, driving by. And these people had hired them to, do tree removals. And so literally a guy working in a bucket, dropping pieces down, guys on the ground, no helmet on, no nothing. I hate to see it.
Anybody else got anything? I had dropped the link as well, what David mentioned, that ugasaw.com. Warren put Tim Ard there in the chat, and Rusty added the TCI chainsaw specialist. While I wait to see if anybody's got anything else for us to wrap up, I just want to say thank you all. This was our first attempt at doing a just PowerPoint presentation, and I think it went really well. The random, you not being able to hear me, except for you're hearing me through David's phone, luckily, was us just being creative. But literally every Zoom call I've been on today, I've had that problem, and it was either we can't have this meeting or we just make it work. So of course we tested it, we tried, we made it work. So hopefully it works well for everybody.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I appreciate everybody being here. You got my number if you want to call me and say hello.
Well, we appreciate you being here and spending your Tuesday evening with us, and all of you guys. David, if you want to head on out, feel free, and I'll make sure to get you the link as well for your sign in and all the great comments people are sending your way.
Awesome. Yep. Thank you so much, everybody. I hope you have a good evening.
Let's wait. Don't end it yet. Let me grab I'm going to steal back let's see here.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, I just want to steal it back real fast before.
Somebody wants the link for the safety equipment. Is that something that I can get you and you can post like later or?
Yeah. If you shoot me in with that. And I honestly just realized, this is what happens to me. Everybody started dropping their questions in the chat. Therefore, it looks like a couple of things came in. Oh, but they just came in the last 10 minutes.
Yeah, I mean, I can answer. I'll try to answer.
Okay. Joseph wants to know, could you guys describe boar cutting?
Yeah, I mean, that's probably a little more technical than people want to get into. Boar cutting is a technique that's not only used in tree felling, but used in cleaning up, down stuff, storm damage. And it allows you to, let me get my bar again. So going back to the starting corner here, if I go up to a tree and I start the starting corner in the log, I can bury the bar inside of the cut and either establish a hinge on a standing tree. It's very hard for me to show you like this, but if you imagine a tree, obviously that's round, and I cut an open face notch on the front, and I come behind the apex of the notch and try to establish hinge material, which is going to actually steer the tree to the ground. I don't want to cut directly from the back of the tree, because let's say the tree may be a back leaner, might lean heavily back. And if I start cutting from the back, the tree is going to sit down on my bar and I'm going to get pinched. So I need to establish some hinge material, and I come in by using this starting corner, and I start it there. And once I get that inside of the log, I can bore all the way through, and then I can move my saw up or back until I have that hinge material created. And then I can cut out the back, not completely out of the back, and get a wedge in there. If it's a back leaner, I need to get a wedge in there. Also, for storm damage, maybe I have a tree that's twisting, okay, that's down, it's been wind thrown, and it wants to twist. And a way to protect myself is I come into the center of the log using, once again, my starting corner, and then I bore all the way through, and then I clear that area out. I come and I go either to the left or the right. It doesn't have to be that much. And I make a cut that comes and bypasses the first cut that I made. And then I come underneath and to the same side, same distance, and I cut and bypass that cut. And what I've done is created like a tongue and groove, if you can visualize. So I minimize that twisting, but the log is actually cut. So boar cutting gets used not only for tree felling, but it also gets used for stuff that's down. It's a great technique. And like I say, make sure you stay on this bottom quadrant and not this upper quadrant. That is definitely not where you want to start that cut. It's very, hard to explain. I apologize like this, but it is a technique, and it's something that, you could see on YouTube or something. There's people that utilize it properly, but keep in mind on YouTube, there's people that do things improperly too. So please don't do all your learning on there, because those people are not experts in some cases.
There is another question, but other than the safety features you covered, are there any other features that would cause the saw to be deemed red tagged, like not able to be used?
I mean, there could be like structural failures of the saw. I don't really know that makes them unsafe, but I see people that use saws that have broken handles, like they have a broken front handle, broken rear handle. In tree care, I mean, it's like I say, there's a lot of moving parts, a lot of things happen. You run over a saw with the skid steer, you drop a limb on it, rigging it out of the tree, and then you need to use the saw. I mean, structurally, there could be some problems. I've seen saws that had the 3 safety features that I would not use because they're not safe. So yes, any kind of structural problem, I wouldn't use it.
Awesome. I think this may be a quick, easy question. What is the optimal cutting angle?
If you're talking about the top plate, it's going to be 25 to 30 degrees. And the reason I say 25 to 30, it depends on the chain type that you have. If you've got a full chisel chain, it's probably 25 degrees. If you've got a semi chisel, it's probably 30, and both types are used depending on the size of your saw. But the best way to know is to look on the box. If you're buying a chain, I don't care what the brand is, if you look on the back of the box, it gives you all the information. It tells you what the top plate angle is. It tells you what the depth gauge is set at. It tells you what file size to use. It's giving you all of this information, and it'll tell you whether it's got reduced kickback features or not. The industry refers to it as either green or yellow label chain. If it's yellow label, it has no reduced kickback features. If it's blue or green label, it does have some type of reduced kickback feature, but there's tons of information on the back of those boxes. If you did not get the box and the saw is brand new, just look up the manufacturer, and online you'll be able to find out based on the pitch of the chain and how many drive links. You'll be able to ascertain what the top plate angles are. But the main thing is on that witness mark. That witness mark is the same angle as the top plate. So if you use that as a reference when you're sharpening, you can make the top plate angle the same as that, and you'll know that it's exactly like it was out of the box.
All right. I think we've reached the end of our questions. We've gone about 20 minutes over, so we greatly appreciate you answering all the questions.
No
Of course, you have David's contact info, mine, if you have any further questions, but we really appreciate everybody spending their time with us, and especially you, David, for sharing your knowledge with all of us tonight.
Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody.
All right.
Thanks, David.
Bye. See you.